Former NFL scout. He's on the volume, one of our faves. We're going to roll for about an hour tonight. John Middlekauff joining us. So let's start with something that I know irritates the hell out of both of us. The Chargers gave up 533 yards and about 8.5 yards of play to Jared Goff and the Lions, who, by the way, were off a bye. I thought it was my favorite bet of the week. It was a push. It was at -1 Monday, but by Friday I get blazing 5. I got -3. But listen, this is not an easy team to defend, although Baltimore did it. They were off a bye. But the ease in which Detroit scored quickly in the second half, Derwin James, and I say this all the time when I watch a coach, your players get better. We tend to think that good players in the NFL, like they're set, like they can't be coached. Derwin James, between the penalties, getting beat, and all obviously he can be sporadic in terms of availability. I don't think Derwin James, I wouldn't re-sign him. I mean, I like him, but I wouldn't pay a safety that anymore, what you have to pay Herbert. I am just, it's, John, at some point we have to acknowledge, I like Jared Goff. I like this O-line. They're not 8.5 yards of play good, right?
I think the defining thing of the Brandon Staley tenure so far as the defensive coordinator, while he's the head coach, he calls the defense, has been in big spots, guys are wide open. And I think as a coach, it doesn't matter what you know. And guys like Brandon Staley, I'm sure on a whiteboard, just like Josh McDaniels, who was fired last week, knows a lot. Like their football knowledge, understanding every yard, every landmark, where everyone's supposed to be, what you're supposed to do against this, if this happens. Do your players know? That's what coaching is. That's what separated Belichick for 20 years. His players always knew what to do. Andy Reid now with Mahomes, the player, and for his whole career, but now they've gone up a level that he has the quarterback. And you watch Brandon Staley in that last drive, the first play, tie game, guy's wide open, goes for 40 yards. And then ultimately get in field goal position because of that play. And I think it's always going back to the playoff game. What happened against the Jags? They had an enormous lead and then blown coverage. And listen, most guys aren't Deion Sanders, Darrelle Revis. DBs are there. They get plays made on them. Football's hard. But when no one's around you, that's the problem with USC's defense the last couple of years. Like there's not even a soul around. This can't be normal, and I think that's the Brandon Staley ultimately is undoing, because Herbert today had a little bit of a muscle flex. Like, this is the reason I'm $180 million quarterback. Keenan Allen's been fantastic this season, clearly playing injured. You can't have a quarterback at that level. Like you said, Jared Goff resurrected his career. Everyone has a lot of respect, if you like football, for what he's done. But Herbert's on a different level, but his defense is just better.
Yeah, Quentin Johnson had a touchdown today, which is big for the Chargers because, and I called the Chargers and asked them, and they're like, we really like him. But the TCU offense was different than the Chargers offense completely, and we're asking a lot of our receivers. That's why even Palmer, year 2, year 3, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, they've been in the system. Gerald Everett, this is a hard offense. We add Kellen Moore now. We introduce a new offense. So I was happy to see that happen. Yeah, and I think, people can believe what they want about quarterbacks. I mean, Jordan Love had 2 picks today, lost, and people will say, oh, he made some great throws. Justin Herbert was throwing dimes all over the field, loses, and people will say he's overrated. I felt today, the Spanos family and Tom Telesco have been frustrated. I could tell you that with some of what's gone on, great disappointment in the money spent on the defense and the inability for it to make stops. But I thought today, Herbert marched down the field. Doesn't have Mike Williams, doesn't have that offensive line. I thought he was stupendous. It's funny. I told you this. Obviously, there's a communication. We don't think Brandon Staley's a dumb guy. There's a communication gap between Brandon and the players. When you get Mike Vrabel, Dan Campbell, and Andy Reid and Mike Tomlin, there's almost a physical presence. Or with Pete Carroll, John Harbaugh, sort of a legendary presence. They're like almost brands. Yeah. Brandon Staley is a smart guy. Is he willing to confront a player? He's a smaller guy. Is he willing to confront a player? Is he willing to bark? Is he willing to use volume? Because I don't understand how you can have veteran players, an older, expensive defense in the wrong spot. Is he willing to call players out? And by the way, Vrabel is, Tomlin is, Pete is, Harbaugh is. That part of this whole thing is connecting. I know guys, Greg Olson told me Pete Carroll's meetings, you didn't make a sound. There was reverence toward Pete. Andy Reid, he will bark at Mahomes. He's intimidating. Spoelstra, Kerr, these guys will snip. They'll get after you. Staley, to me, is sort of this intellectual. The players respect him. They may know he's smart, but a lot of times, John, I've had bosses. They're smart. It doesn't connect with me. And that's what I wonder.
There was a famous story when I worked in the Eagles office about Andy and a high draft pick at offensive line. This would have been the mid-2000s, basically getting in a shoving match. I don't know if it lasted that long, but Andy's enormous. This offensive lineman, a tackle, enormous. And the whole place kind of moved, right? The whole building. And you bring up Steve Kerr. Think how Steve is perceived on the outside. Very progressive, liberal, outspoken, feels like he resonates with a certain crowd. Yet from a sports crowd, he's famous for fighting Michael Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
Had a historical knockdown drag out with Draymond once upon a time in Oklahoma City that went public. A ton more that are not public. And part of it, like you said, is Brandon Staley really willing? You got to be confrontational. That's part of the sport. And it's the football in general is probably the most uncomfortable of them all because of the power coaches yield, right? In basketball, some coaches, not everyone has Steve Kerr or Spoelstra's pull, but in football, the head coach can always bench a player at any moment, or he's in charge. Even if you work for Jerry Jones, the coach has a lot of pull over you, and you watch Brandon Staley, like, are players intimidated by this guy? And nothing ever changes. And listen, I have nothing personal against the guy. People think I hate him. I just, I've just watched his thing over and over. Now, the one thing I red flagged is, the media is not that difficult to deal with. If you just call them by their first name, you can get on their good graces. And he was good at that. So that was the phony element. I saw it with the San Francisco Giants with Gabe Kapler. Because ultimately, if you win or lose, who cares what they think about you? That's what you're paid there to do. And he's just struggled at that. And now, this year's been hanging on by a thread. And when you have this quarterback, there's a couple players I think that are pretty polarizing, who are pretty good. Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert. And I think I got a couple texts today about Trevor Lawrence. They're like, yeah, there's some intangible stuff I wish he had a little more of. I think he can be a little overrated. One guy I never hear that from. I don't care. It could be the Chiefs, the Eagles, or just other random teams. Everyone supports Justin Herbert as a player.
Yes.
He is not polarizing internally in the NFL. Good teams, bad teams, middle of the road teams. Everyone stamps. This guy is a baller, right? He's in that crew of what gets universal agreement. And, you wasted his rookie contract. Now you're paying him big money. Luckily, the way football is, he can play at this level for a long period of time, but the time is now. I mean, what are we doing? Whether it's Jim Harbaugh, whether it's, I don't know exactly who the coach is, but you have to upgrade. It's not even debatable.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the big picture of the NFC, let's pivot a little bit to the Lions. I do think they match up with the NFC. I think that offensive line will be formidable against Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Dallas. Now, I don't know if they'll win. If they're at home, they've got a shot. But I'll say this about the Lions. In the NFC, it's about O-line. The best O-lines in football are arguably Philly, Detroit, Dallas. You can make an argument. Those are the best three. So you have to have some bit of a pass rush or you'll get engulfed. And by the way, Dallas, great pass rush. Philly, great pass rush. San Francisco now, Chase Young added, great pass rush. You have to have an offensive line, and you have to have a pass rush in the NFC. In the AFC, it's a battle of quarterbacks. It's a battle of brilliant coaches and quarterbacks. But Detroit, O-line pass rush, veteran quarterback weapons, I think Detroit matches up with everybody, including Philadelphia. Baltimore, Lamar Jackson? No, I don't.
Yeah.
But I when you start looking at that NFC, John, I think they can beat anybody.
Well, in a dome, they're very potent because their quarterback has proven you get him outside in inclement weather, back to college, all through his pro career, it can go off the rails. But in a controlled environment, what does Detroit have? Like you said, not just an offensive line. They are loaded with weapons that all balance each other out. You got Jamison Williams, speed guy. St. Brown can go across the middle, make plays happen. How good does the young tight end Laporta look? They have multiple running backs. Montgomery, they just drafted Gibbs high.
Yeah.
So you got weapons everywhere that all complement each other with different skills. So to me, the only question mark, could they go outside and win in Philly? I don't see that because it would be cold and potentially bad weather, and that's kind of Jared Goff's bugaboo. But we've talked about this before, and I said it weeks ago. Just look at their schedule. They're 13, 14 wins, they could definitely compete for the 1 seed. And if they control their environment, they're more than likely, I think there's a decent chance at worst they're the 2 seed. That means you get 2 home playoff games, right? You get the first round and the second round. Now, that second round game could be a 2-3, them and the Niners. Obviously, they would be the underdog in that game if it came down to it. But like you said, they would definitely have a chance to win. And in a dome, Jared Goff, this version of Jared Goff is pretty impressive.
Yeah, going forward on 4th down, they absolutely have a culture. They have a mindset. They're aggressive. This is what I really respect about Dan Campbell. I know exactly what they are. They're not Miami where you get a different team based on opponent. Take the Baltimore game out. I know what I get from Baltimore every Sunday. Tough, physical, can run. Goff has some limitations, not a ton. Don't love their secondary. You can beat them over the top. They're usually going to win in the 28-27, 31-29. That's kind of where they're at. But I know what I get from Detroit. I got no idea. I thought I knew what I got from Jacksonville. I have no idea what I'm getting from some of these teams like Dallas week to week, Buffalo week to week. I have no idea what I'm getting. So to me, when I watch a team, it's like, what are you? Oh, I know exactly what Detroit is.
One thing with Dan Campbell, I remember a couple years ago before the Lions got good, I remember watching an interview, and I think there's a big difference between him, let's say, and Brandon Staley. And he said that several years, I think it was 3 or maybe 5, that he worked for Sean Payton as his assistant head coach. He said, one thing I learned from him is in my nature and trained from Bill Parcells as a player was to be very conservative, run the ball, punt the ball, play 1980s, 1990s football. And I saw with Sean Payton that willingness to go for it in certain spots, to be aggressive. And he changed my perspective on that. So when I watch the Lions, when they go for it, to me, their mindset, and listen, you could argue it's just the numbers. I feel it's different than when Brandon Staley just feels like haphazardly, like we just go for it because that's always what we do. We go for it no matter what. You saw the Lions today seal the game with going for it. And I think he would give Sean Payton credit, and he has before, for changing that mindset. So from that old school kind of meathead Parcells to kind of being a young progressive mindset and mixing and blending them together. The physicality with that kind of outlook on the sport of football has led to the Lions. I mean, Colin, they're looking like a 13 or 14 win team. The Detroit Lions winning 13, 14 games. Yeah. That's insane.
Vikings don't have a quarterback right now for the future. Kirk Cousins won't be it. Bears don't. Say what you want about Jordan Love. That's not it. And they'll probably stick with him for another year. So this is one of these things where they could become the Packers. Packers always had good O-lines, above average quarterback play, good enough weapons, not always great defenses. Favre and Aaron rarely had great defenses, right? But this, to me, they always had good front offices. I think the front office, I think they've really done a good job in the front office with their top picks, especially. They've hit home runs, and they've also been, much like their playing style, they've been hyper aggressive as drafters. Like running back at 12, linebackers, like a 1988 draft, and running backs, linebackers. So it's like, I don't know. It's like Baltimore has that with me. Baltimore went and drafted a safety and a center in the first round. 2 positions you generally go later, but if you have self-belief, I think Detroit does. They're in a good spot. All right, NBA fans, basketball is officially back, and the DraftKings Sportsbook, official sports betting partner of the NBA, is celebrating with an unbeatable offer. New customers can get $200 instantly in bonus bets by throwing down just $5 on the NBA. That is a good deal. Win or lose, doesn't matter. You'll start the season with an instant W, a win. All right, DraftKings parlays, everybody's got a shot to even more basketball wins and bigger basketball wins. String together multiple bets. It's called a parlay. Same game parlay. Build your parlay across multiple games. And what does that give you? Better odds, so you can make a smaller bet and win more money. I like doing them. I like parlays. They're fun. Basketball is more fun when you're in on the action. And with DraftKings, you will be. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app right now. Use the code Colin, COLIN. This NBA season, $10, $5. It's fun. It's juice. I love it. New customers, $200 instantly in bonus bets by betting just $5. Yeah, you heard it right. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The code is Colin, COLIN. The crown is yours. San Francisco annihilates Jacksonville. So there are these moments. There are certain things in the NFL that are true. Andy Reid on a bye. Shanahan, rested, healthy team on a bye. Should we look at this for Jacksonville? I'm a little bothered by it because it's okay if a Seattle or Detroit plays Lamar Jackson. There's nothing in the league like him. NFC teams have no idea. He's like 17-1. But you're at home. You were rested. You were healthy. That game was never competitive. I've been a huge Jags fan. I got to be honest with you. I didn't like what I saw.
I think it was a perfect storm. I wouldn't put the stamp of approval that this Jags team is going to go to the AFC Championship game, but I'm going to give them a little bit, throw that thing in the trash can. They got the 49ers coming off 3 losses. John Lynch said last week their team looked like they were running with concrete in their shoes. They looked so slow. They were desperate for a bye. Everyone needed to take a deep breath. Their defensive line, Colin, was really underachieving. When the Yankees lose, they're paying all their hitters to hit home runs. When they don't hit home runs, they're just going to lose. When the 49ers don't sack the quarterback, the amount of money, they have the highest paid defensive lineman in the league in Bosa. They gave Hargrave $20 million a year, 40 guaranteed this offseason, the highest paid free agent defensive lineman. They just trade for Chase Young. Eric Armstead makes $16 million a year. They're all in on that group. When that group doesn't dominate, and I know statistically they were leading the league in pressures, it did not look the same. What I witnessed today, Nick Bosa is a good example. He was statistically, pressures-wise, having a good year. But when you watched him, you went, he doesn't look like TJ Watt and Myles Garrett right now. Because a great pass rusher, it doesn't matter what you throw at him, right? That's why Belichick always pushes back when people compare someone to Lawrence Taylor. He goes, you could throw 7 people at him. He's hung over. He's still sacking the quarterback. So there are no excuses. Now you put Chase Young over there. Nick Bosa looked like the $125 million man again. And if that's the case, the Niners are potent because Fred Warner is the best linebacker in the league. Hufanga is a fantastic playmaker. So to me, that defensive line, they are built to play from ahead. Brock Purdy today, if he doesn't turn the ball over, he's a really explosive quarterback. He averaged over 11 yards of completion. They push the ball down the field.
Yes.
He is not afraid to throw the ball down the field. And they have made NFC Championship runs with dinking and dunking and playing defense. So when you push the ball down the field, that's the team that was kicking the shit out of everybody the first 5 weeks. But it starts with the defense. And when their defense dominates like that, like Trevor Lawrence, kind of went into a shell. But I got news for you. I think besides Mahomes and Josh Allen and maybe Lamar, most people are getting destroyed and they have no shot. And even those guys might lose if that's the performance. But Trevor Lawrence becomes much more pedestrian when you're peppering him every play, which the 49ers did.
It's funny. For years, the Ravens and the Niners have had these constant injuries in camp and in preseason, and you just wait for them to get healthy. And I wonder the two downsides to Shanahan's style. Number one, half the league is using it now, so the element of surprise. Now he's the genius behind it, right? So it's copycat versions of that offense, but there's less of an element of surprise. A lot of people are using it. So his window for a couple of years, nobody's doing it. I'm doing it. That's over. Yeah. So that hurts a little. And that's why quarterback becomes so valuable, because in these close playoff games, it's a play by a Herbert. It's a play by a Mahomes or a Burrow. It's a play. The second thing is that physicality is really the trademark of his dad and Kyle. And we got another, 8 weeks regular season, 6-7 weeks regular season. And I watched them today and I said, that version, that's the best team in the league.
Yeah,
that's the best team in the league. But even their practices are intense. Their entire culture, like Baltimore, is intense. Baltimore and San Francisco, there's a reason they're always hurt. And I look at the Niners today and I thought, if you gave me that team, that they're going to get to the NFC Championship. But I wonder, and you knew this team very well, is that can you take the foot off? Can you give McCaffrey a week off? Can you rest Debo? Is it in them?
No.
The schedule's not. No. It's not in them. No. So it's like you're asking. You marry the party animal, and then you're upset that he's the party animal. That's what attracted you to the party animal. It's like, this is who they are. I just don't know if they'll be healthy by the end. They never feel like they are.
Yeah, Kyle's established who he is. I mean, he will run Christian McCaffrey into the ground because that's his best player. And I think you saw today a lot. Why do the Eagles win so many games the last couple of years? Because for the most part, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert have been on the field. And no team's going to have 3 better players than that. And that's been the difference in a lot of their wins right now, whatever they're 8-1. Well, the 49ers, you remove Trent Williams, who's basically like Shaquille O'Neal in the NFL in his prime,
Right.
and Deebo Samuel, who becomes their second best player behind McCaffrey and George Kittle, and Brandon Ayuk. They're unstoppable. But you remove those two guys, as you saw the last couple of weeks, they become a little more pedestrian, and their margin for error is a lot slimmer. But to me, Kyle is wired like a guy that would have been in the 80s, that would have been coaching against Buddy Ryan and Bill Parcells and Bill Walsh. Yeah. He would have fit. He would have had a lot in common. Kyle's viewed as this young guy with his whole crew. He's an old soul. To me, he has much more in common with Belichick and Pete Carroll, guys in their 70s, in terms of philosophically the way he looks at football, which makes sense. What did he grow up around? Mike Shanahan in the 80s and 90s in the NFL, being at practice, being around that. And Mike Shanahan was notoriously somewhat of a conservative coach. Why? Running game first. And like you said, the difference also, Kyle and some of these other guys, they all run the same plays. Kyle does have better players. There's a collegiate element where, a lot of teams run certain things in college, but do you have Alabama or Ohio State's personnel? Because when he's rolling out Debo and he's rolling out McCaffrey and he's rolling out Ayuk, it's not really a fair fight. And listen, the Jags are pretty good. Like, the Jags have a lot of good offensive personnel. They couldn't even begin to sniff the group that came in motivated. That's the other thing. This is a group of guys that have won a lot of playoff games. Everyone's, dragging them through the mud, and rightfully so. They've been pretty embarrassing the last couple of weeks. They came out. They probably would have beat any team in the league today, given what was on the line.
And let's be honest about Jacksonville. So I've seen them get hammered by San Francisco, can't beat Kansas City. I still think they're a baby step away.
I agree.
It's not a giant step from being Cincinnati. I just don't think they're there yet. So, and the other thing is, I like Trevor Lawrence. I love college football so much that I think, part of me, I don't think Trevor's as good as Andrew Luck, but I think he's really, really good. I don't think Caleb Williams is probably as good as Andrew Luck, maybe as good as Trevor. But one of the things that Luck and Trevor Lawrence share in common, and this is one of the criticisms I've heard about both early, but I didn't think I wasn't going to question it on the air. Do they live for football? They love playing it. Andrew Luck gave up the sport. There's no fallacy here that anybody thinks, oh, he misses it dearly. Trevor Lawrence has said publicly, like, I love playing football, but it doesn't define me. GMs and owners don't want to hear that. Coaches don't want to hear that. And I think Trevor's a great competitor, but I do look at sometimes Trevor Lawrence, and I don't see quite the fire I would love. But I mean, who am I to say that? But Brady is 44, 6 rings.
Colin, he said it. He said it once upon a time. He said football is not everything to me, or what. I might be butchering his exact quote, but remember around the draft.
Yeah.
He said those words. And let's use today as an example. You had one of the best prospects of the last 20 years, Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah.
And you had Mr. Irrelevant, right? And I would say one defining characteristic of Brock Purdy, why Fred Warner, why George Kittle, why Christian McCaffrey, who are wired like Kyle Shanahan, Andy Reid, Bill Belichick, addicts, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. Brock Purdy fits under that. Football is everything to him.
Yeah.
It means absolutely everything to him. And that's the thing with Trevor Lawrence. He's so much more gifted than everyone else. Is there a little bit of a basketball element? Like his talent, 6'4", 6'5", good arm, naturally accurate, can move. It's easy. Showed up at Clemson in the middle of their dynasty, immediately starts. The other guy gets told to transfer. Brock Purdy's begging for scholarships, comes third string. There's an element, and we've talked about this a lot before. Most of the quarterbacks that are having a lot of success are not the number one overall pick. Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck, but Peyton's even more of an example because he played for as long as he did, is an all-time outlier. Most of the best quarterbacks are usually kind of random picks.
For a limited time, Verizon customers can get Netflix and NFL Plus for just $25 a month. It's called Plus Play. That's $120 in annual savings. Plus Play is a platform where Verizon customers can shop, manage, and save on the subscriptions that you already love, right? Like Netflix and NFL Plus. With NFL Plus Premium, you get access to live games on mobile, my fave, NFL Red Zone, NFL Network, and more. Just go to Verizon.com/plusplay. Verizon.com/plusplay to save on Netflix and NFL Plus today for a limited time only now. Limited time only. And I want to talk about Bengals, Houston Texans. because this was a spot. This is one of the bets I should have taken. I should have taken Houston plus the points. Everybody told me to take this because, Cincinnati had beaten Buffalo, Ravens next. And this is that classic sandwich game, is that I don't want to hear any excuses for Daniel Jones. I don't want to hear it for Jordan Love or Kenny Pickett. I watched every snap of that thing today. CJ Stroud is so accurate, so impressive. He had a bad pick, very much like Andrew Luck. Shrugged it off, had zero effect, very short memory. And listen, we all know Burrow's great. But I got to tell you something. When I watched CJ Stroud, that was a real moment. That is a better roster on the road, bad pick, bounce back, march down the field with no time left. Now, if Boyd could catch, maybe it's a different outcome. But I got to tell you, John, I looked at him. It's funny. His comp was Jared Goff with a little more mobility. Well, if I told you, if you think about that, that's like, well, hell, if Goff had mobility, he'd be like a top 8 quarterback.
I know. Right? 100%. 100%.
So I watched Stroud, and I'm just like, I'm sold. I mean, I today was just like that last drive. It's like, man, I am sold on him.
Well, you and I have been talking about it all season long. The separating factor, what makes guys have success that are drafted high or not, their ability to layer those throws. It's not the Brett Favre 70-yard on a rope, into double coverage. Most guys can't do that. Can you layer the throw over an underneath defender, whether it's a corner or a linebacker, and then a safety behind him and put it in there? And a lot of guys can't. Most guys can't. And most guys can't consistently do it. This guy does it with ease. And let's face it, with the Thursday night game, with Bryce on display, and this, when I got out of football and went to radio and started going to a lot of baseball games and basketball games, and I knew this being at so many NFL games, but the importance of size in pro sports, the outliers of small guys is so small. Like Steph Curry's considered a small guy. Steph Curry's 6'4", and now he's jacked. Like he's not that small. He's not Isaiah Thomas. He's not as small as you think.
Listen, I'm 6'2". I'd be like the 5th tallest president in the history of the country. And I've been around Steph Curry twice. He's bigger than me and 15 pounds heavier.
Yeah, I remember going to Giants baseball games, seeing Hunter Pence and Madison Bumgarner and the size of these guys. And you see Bryce Young. I just don't see how that's going to work. He is so small. It's one thing to be Kyler Murray's small, but he's 220 pounds and he's faster than every guy on the field. So he has things that he can hang his hat on. Even today, I'm watching some of his highlights. I don't know if he's 100%, but he's still faster than everyone in the Atlanta Falcons. Bryce Young's not that fast, doesn't have a great arm, and he weighs 170 pounds. And when Javon Hargrave or some of these defensive linemen fall on you, there's no way to just get back up. You watch CJ Stroud, he's big, he can move, and throwing is the easiest part of this game. It just comes. Yeah. Like I don't even think it's that debatable. I'm not trying to. We're only in November. The Texans wouldn't even pick up their phone call if they try to do a trade. And how would Carolina not have a redo on that? And is that just David Tepper forcing it? Because I'd say the Houston Texans, who also really like Bryce Young, sometimes you need a little luck. Hell, the Chargers would have taken Tua. He's on your team. That's all that matters. They should be doing cartwheels that this guy, the way it all played out, fell to them, because I don't see any chance Bryce Young could be like a quarter of as good as this guy.
Well, and also Ohio State has a history. Think how great Ohio State football has had, and they've never had a great NFL quarterback. And part of that is because Ohio State, outside of Michigan, has significantly better talent than everybody in their conference. Alabama's great, even during their run. LSU, Georgia, stacked. Texas A&M didn't have the coach, stacked. Ohio State faces one game a year, and they out-recruit historically Michigan. That they're even so. CJ Stroud, 5-star tackle. A lot of time, 5-star receivers. Heartline recruits better than anybody in the country at wide receiver. So there's a reason Ohio State, it's not USC. Similar, Matt Leinart barely got touched in college. There is a reason. It's not really living an NFL experience. So CJ Stroud, my thing was, these Ohio State quarterbacks are talented, but God, they all put up gigantic numbers. But his accuracy is just, today he had a couple, and now, it helps. DeMeco Ryans great coach. Tank Dell. Holy moly. Is that what a pick. So like sometimes he's got juice. Bryce Young has no juice. With Bryce Young, Herb Street said it the other day. He goes, they ran one offense. They're transitioning to another, and they have none of the players. So it's going to be really ugly. Some of this for Houston is they had a very good offseason. they signed in free agency, if you remember, John, some B-level players. And I remember saying on FS1, I was like, they're having a quietly, they picked up about 6, 7 rotational starters, guys that will play. So then you hit on Tank Dell. So I will say CJ's got a little better talent that I think Houston's got some juice. Don't you think a little bit?
For sure. And they've drafted well. They're going to have a ton of money. The Cowboys never have any cap space to sign free agents because Jerry's always overpaying his own guys. If they ever did, people would love to go to Texas and the no state income tax. Houston now, if they can take advantage of these next couple of years, could have a chance to kind of load up, make some bold trades. They got some picks from the Deshaun Watson's thing still coming in. They'd have a chance. They got a star coach. I heard what Herb Street said. The only thing I would disagree, because I don't disagree that their offense looks terrible and their lack of talent, but there is a physical characteristic attribute thing at the highest level of pro sports that you go, it's going to be difficult for them. So
yes.
Even if they get the right offense, they upgrade an offensive coordinator, hell, they fire Frank and get a better coach. When does that, what it looks like to all of us, how minuscule the guy is, going to work?
Yeah.
Even if CJ Stroud hadn't been this good, his body type, his movement, we've seen that before. Well, I've never seen anything like Bryce before. And I like Bryce coming out of Alabama. I'm not trying to act like I'm some genius. Yeah. I thought he was sweet, but it ain't working. And it doesn't even look like it has a chance to.
Listen, Fran Tarkenton was small, but nobody drafted small guys after Fran. It's more of a copycat league now. Like that was just a unique player. Georgia, Fran Tarkenton ran around. But there wasn't like 7, 8 guys drafted after it. It was 6'4", 6'5", guys that could throw the ball down the field, did not move. The truth is Russell Wilson got Johnny Manziel drafted, Baker drafted, Kyler drafted. He got a lot of these guys drafted. And we've watched, I think fairly, even though Russell over the last 3 weeks has been better because they've established a run game under Peyton, he's lost his juice. It's just the bottom line is when you're that small in this league, it doesn't take as many hits. Christ, I saw Cam Newton, Ben, age 33. You're like, whoa, that doesn't look anything like it did at 29. So it's like Ben got old fast. Cam got old fast. Josh Allen's got about 3 more years of this.
Yeah,
and he's
going like he's going for sure.
And he's 6'6", 260. So I do think with Bryce, and your point on Kyler is right. For the record, Kyler's been banged up several times. Kyler did not want to run in the playoff game. It's like, 5'10" guys don't want to run.
Well, I was texting with a college scouting director on Thursday night, and we were texting about Bryce. He said, his comp, if he was going to be the best version of himself, was going to be Russell. So the difference is Russell weighs 225 pounds.
Yes.
Right. When he was young. And he also inherited and got to go to a team that immediately had a great running back. Because remember, early on, Russell got to grow into the team and had a great defense. But Russell's arm is way stronger than Bryce's. Russell had a very, very strong arm and was thick. That's the thing that really concerns me is the size. When you watch CJ Stroud, what he does translates to, even if he just maintains doing what he is, if they do a good enough job around him, you get the more athletic Jared Goff. And the other thing with CJ, a lot of times if you have a one-off game in college that's so much different than everything else you've ever seen, a lot of times when guys at like Mountain West schools and they get to play a big-time school and are good or bad, you put a lot of emphasis, fair or not, just because the level of comp. CJ's game against Georgia, you're going, is that who he is? Could he do that? But he never had to do that against Iowa and Wisconsin. But it turns out, he can. That is him.
That was Herbert against Wisconsin. They never ran him. And Tom Telesco of the Chargers went and said, I asked him, why didn't you run him? And they're like, we didn't have a backup. If he got hurt, we didn't have anybody else. Well, that's what Ohio State said with Stroud. We didn't really think we had a guy that we couldn't lose him. So Stroud and Herbert against Wisconsin and Georgia, we all went, whoa, time out. I get that too? It's the size, the arm, the accuracy. So I thought it was impressive. In sports, the scoreboard doesn't always tell the complete story. The dad who happens to be a world-class quarterback. Untold tales of athletes you thought you knew. The heart-racing pressure for the heart, soul, and survival of the multi-billion-dollar business of F1. Stories about college kids who were given a last shot, a last chance at redemption. David Beckham's meteoric rise, not only as a global soccer superstar, but becoming a pop culture icon. Upsets, injuries, come from behind victories. You're going to get it all. And I've seen it all with Netflix Sports. These are the stories that turn all of us into sports fans and give everybody something to cheer for, to feel for, to hold your breath for, and to get up out of your seat for. Whether you're a diehard or a brand new fan, intense or casual, shows like F1, Drive to Survive, Quarterback, Full Swing, Untold, Beckham, and more. Netflix has a story for every type of fan. Netflix turns us all into fans. Netflix. Okay, let's talk some Patriots Colts morning game. Not a great game to watch, but a horrendously bad Mac Jones interception that could have won the game for New England. And on the following series, they put Bailey Zappi in, which is a total statement by the organization. Bill O'Brien was harping and yelling and screaming on the sideline. I think it was third quarter with Mac Jones. Listen, I thought Mac had an opportunity. I thought New England was a perfect spot for him. Play within a system, good defense, run game. I thought it worked. He's regressed. I have been told that the cheap shot stuff, the Grayson Allen stuff, he was called out by an offensive lineman last year at practice. They're like, dude, you do that to people, they're going to do that stuff to us. I have also been told that Belichick really turned off. They have struggled to hard coach him. You know, Brady grew up in a big family. You could hard coach Tom. Mac is not as available to that. He's not willing to be as hard. He didn't come from as big a family. So coaches have struggled when they get on him. He sort of kind of pivots, pouts, is not kind of accepting of it. Tom flourished, loved it. A lot of great players do. They like to be coached.
Jalen Hurts
loves it. He doesn't necessarily love that. So that Bailey Zappi, to me, I wouldn't be shocked if they started Zappi next week. But, you know, my dad used to say this all the time, lubricate, don't agitate. Your employment will be based, hands will be raised when you're not in the room.
Yeah.
I don't think the coaches like him. I don't think the teammates like him. I think his judgment is poor. Judgment, it's CJ Stroud, and maybe it's just his accuracy. But, I just watched Mac Jones on that fourth down. He short-armed it. I mean, he looked intimidated. He was backpedaling. I thought they may have just decided on that play. It's done.
I thought at the beginning of the season that Mac Jones was going to get everyone fired, and he's honestly been way worse than I imagined it going. I mean, he's been objectively one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. I mean, the interceptions he throws on a consistent basis are insane. It's one thing to push a ball into a spot when you're, down late in the game. It's another thing in those spots where he's not even close. And whether his confidence now has waned, whether it's completely unraveled, but I never thought he was that good. I thought drafting a guy at 15 that to me has 4th, 5th round attributes. It's why you can't take just stats in college and just plug him into a spot. Oh, this guy's a first rounder because he throws. Look who he's thrown to. I mean, they had 2 straight years where all 4 of their wide receivers got drafted in the top 15. All 4 wide receivers in the top 15. Think about that. I mean, I don't think Ohio State has that in the bag right now with the group they've just had. So, and then the COVID year, which he exploded. I think one thing we learned, and you saw that today, Trevor Lawrence today was standing. That year fooled us all. Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, Trey Lance didn't play. We still don't know what the hell Justin Fields is, but I think it's fair to say we're leaning. He's not going to be the quarterback of the Bears, so that was wrong. But that year specifically for Alabama, I mean, they had such an advantage. The schools were shut down. Alabama didn't shut down. They never stopped lifting. They never stopped training. That was in the peak of their powers. They were going through quarterbacks. They had a bunch of cohesion. They had a bunch of high character guys like Landon Dickerson and Will Anderson leading the charge. And Devontae Smith was around, who was like the heartbeat of the team. It was built like an NFL team. What Saban's doing right now, they're about to go 11-1, is incredible because they don't have the talent. Like that team winning, like he was stacked. He had a squad. Yeah. And I think Mac Jones, it's just one of those classic, you look back in college, really benefited from it. And let's face it, Belichick was desperate because when Tom left, which Bill was clearly forcing him out, which, listen, Bill copied Walsh. He did the same thing. The difference is Walsh always had a replacement around. Bill just get out of here. Jimmy was already gone. What the hell was he going to do? He played the 1 year with Cam Newton, who was a shell of himself. He got into a situation in the draft where he didn't have a choice, and he drafts the guy at 15. He's just not good enough. And he's definitely not good enough to overcome average to below average around him. And that's what their offensive line's hit or miss. Skill guys at wide receiver. Bill, the GM, has let Bill down the coach big time.
Yeah, and I also think some of it is this. So Bill lost the best player ever, Brady, the best tight end arguably ever, Gronk, the best offensive line coach arguably ever, Dante Scarnecchia, and Josh McDaniels, high-end OC, in a 2-year period. The truth is, that's just too much brain power. The opposite side of the ball. Now, Sean McVay lost Bobby Wagner, Jalen Ramsey. What if he'd lost Aaron Donald and Raheem Morris, an excellent assistant left? This Ram defense would be awful.
Yeah.
Thank God Donald can still play, and Raheem Morris is a tremendous coordinator. Bill lost the best quarterback, tight end, O-line coach, and it's the other side of the ball. And so, to some degree, Shanahan this year, after Saleh and DeMeco Ryans, I don't think Steve Wilks is quite as good as those two.
Well, he's not.
And even with the personnel, the defense isn't the same. So, it'd be easy to bash Belichick, but when you lose multiple, if you would have lost DeMeco Ryans, Bosa, Fred Warner, and Hufanga, that defense isn't the same.
The other thing is everyone's shitting on Bill because it was all Tom. And obviously Tom played a huge role. There is no coach in the Hall of Fame beside Parcells who had the Hall of Fame quarterback of defense in Lawrence Taylor. Walsh, Holmgren, Andy, they all have incredible Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Now, Belichick's 71, 72 years old. Well, let's face it, this thing's over. You're not going to transition. Whenever I hear, well, bring in a personnel guy. So a 72-year-old that's made hundreds of millions of dollars, who's been doing this, who's been in the NFL since 1975, is just going to, just bring in this 43-year-old assistant GM from San Francisco, and he can pick the players, all coach. Like, that's not working. This thing, listen, this was never going to be easy. It's always ugly at the end. Phil Jackson with the Knicks, I know he was an executive, but same thing. It usually, you don't get a swan song. You don't write off. Usually it's Gardner Minshew kicking your ass in Germany. And I know he did, and Mac Jones throwing picks. And this is, I think it's over. And I think Robert Kraft, I don't exactly know how they're going to word it. Mutual depart, firing. I can't imagine Belichick being the head coach in 2024. I can't because I don't think he's going to be open to changing. And they're not, if you're them, why even let's just start new. I do think you could trade him. Couldn't you trade him for just a pick, give him another spot to Washington or Chicago or San Diego? You just take the contract, take Bill for a couple of years and see if he's got anything left.
Hey, Trey Lance, we're not sure he can play a lick. Got a 4th-round pick. You can get a 4th-round pick out of Mac Jones. I think if Bill retired and they hired Ben Johnson from the Lions and hit or went and bought like a Devontae Adams, I think you have a 9-win team. It looks a lot different. Not great, but I do think some of this is brain power out of the building. Bill's going to do things his way. They do not have a number 1 receiver. I'd argue they don't have a 2. They've got a bunch of guys. They don't have a number 1 tight end. The O-line is really young and for one of the rare times hurt a lot. I mean, they drafted 3 guards. They're hurt a lot. So I think Mac Jones. I don't think Trey Lance can play in this league. I think Mac Jones can at a lower level, 18th best quarterback, but I think he can play. But I do think right now.
But do you think Bill's coaching somewhere else next year? Do you think?
No, he's got a compound in Nantucket. He's got $100 million net worth. He's not a spender. He's got his dog, his girlfriend. He's got his Nantucket. Probably he's got a place down in Jupiter, Florida, something like that. Bill likes to golf. And frankly, it'd be different. There are some coaches who can pivot from coaching to the front office. Parcells in Miami took a 1-15 team and won 11 games, basically replacing the bottom third of his roster. Gave Tony Sperano the gig and they won 11 games. That's not really Belichick.
Pat Riley did it, likes it.
Yeah, I don't think that's Phil Jackson's strength.
Well, Bill's not good at it. Bill's not good at identifying. I had a personnel guy tell me the problem Bill has is when it gets closer and closer to draft day, he doesn't listen to anybody. And then that last week, he gets on the phone and calls his buddies that are all the head coaches and then just goes in on guys that the people in the building are, Bill, we've spent all this time working and you were in agreement. And then you pivot last second. What are we doing?
That's what I heard happen with N'Keal Harry. He called Herm Edwards.
Yeah.
And it was like the scouts, the guys were like, no, that's a third round. That's a late second. And he called Herm. And by the way, they've got some Bama guys. I mean, if you go look, Urban guys, Bama guys, that's your source, I'm sure, is accurate. Because I heard on N'Keal Harry, it was like the scouting department pushed back.
And to me, there's nothing wrong in using the coaches. Like, for example, the Niners with Brandon Ayuk. He ran really slow at the combine, but they liked him. So they leaned on Herm Edwards, who was like the godfather to John Lynch's son. And Herm's like, I'm telling you, he's fast. Don't worry about that speed. But they didn't trust him for the evaluation of picking him. They just trust him as a source to supplement some things that they wanted to make sure they were right on. Where Bill just changes the draft board on his own, Dan Snyder style, goes rogue. All of a sudden, you have a guy drafted in the 3rd and 5th round that were undrafted free agents, and the personnel department's like, what was the point of our last 12 months? And ultimately, Bill doesn't give a shit about them. It's why a lot of guys, the moment they could get out, left. The other thing is, it was fun when you were winning. You're like, he's miserable. We don't make as much here, but you're winning rings. It'll set you up for life. Those days are over. And as you saw, that it's, I expect Robert Kraft, because what was he always known for? Being ruthless. A year early instead of a year late. He copied that from Walsh. That was the way he ran the franchise for 20 plus years. Why wouldn't the Krafts do that with him? Right? They've paid him an ungodly amount of money. Firings at this point are never easy, but he's not 53. You're talking about a 72-year-old guy. I mean, he's got 2.5 decades, which is unheard of in football.
All right. Cowboys, Giants, our last NFL thoughts. Listen, I think I had this belief, it's a theory, and I think it's right, is that Brian Daboll and Joe Shine, the GM, they didn't want to give Daniel Jones that money. They didn't want to. Mara, feeling he had an Eli Manning feel, they almost look alike. He's a better athlete, but they look alike. So he makes the decision. He can't fire Daboll or the GM. He can't. It's his decision. So it's like they always say in divorces, whoever wants the divorce, there's a psychology. That person that wants the divorce feels guilty. You can get a better deal in divorce hearings and proceedings because the person who wants the divorce can often feel guilty. I think the Maras know, John Mara knows, I stuck these guys and there's nothing you can do. So I think everybody's safe in New York. I like Daboll a lot. I like the GM. I think he didn't draft Daniel Jones.
No.
And Dallas, Dallas was the best pick on the board probably today. I mean, they play. Dak's a great home favorite. They are great with a lead. They're great playing downhill. They're what Buffalo was about 2 years ago. Buffalo they
outscored the Giants this year, Colin, by 75 points, I think, 76.
But by playing this kid, they're at 2 wins. So the Bears have Carolina's pick. Carolina plays a lot of home games against Tampa and Atlanta. That schedule's weak. I think they may play Green Bay. I think Carolina's going to win another game. They beat Houston. But I kind of look at the Giants, and I don't know if they win another football game. Maybe they do. But I think it's really clear now. I think they're going to draft a quarterback. The question becomes, Bo Nix feels like he's sort of separated. Penix has the injuries that Bo's your 3rd pick. Now, Jalen Daniels at LSU, I think has moved from 2nd round to 1st. I think he's moved into the 1st round. People think he's frail. My takeaway is, I don't know. I watch him run. I watch him throw. High school, college, 2 conferences. It works everywhere. Hard coaches, by the way. Herm defensive guy. Kelly the screamer. It works everywhere. But if Caleb and Drake, and I believe they're top 2, I think Bo has cemented himself. He makes no mistakes. Again, 2 conference success. He's 3rd. You don't want to get into a bidding war, but I started looking last week at all those teams at the top. I can argue Giants, if they don't beat New England when they meet, Giants have maybe one more win. I think they're going to draft a quarterback.
Yeah, I think I wrote down, obviously, the Eagles, and they play at the Saints as a loss. The Pats game and the Packers game, those are huge swings. I don't think the Packers are winning many more games, and clearly the Pats. So those 3 matchups of Packers-Giants, Pats-Giants are going to have enormous implications. Because like you say, Carolina's defense actually pretty solid. They got some pretty good personnel. If Bryce has a good day, or maybe 2 over the last 2 months, they could win a couple games. Still, they would be my betting favorite. I would say the Pats and the Giants. I mean, the Giants are really, if they roll out, if Tommy DeVito starts they will lose every game. To me, Tyrod Taylor, if he ever were to come back, he would be a little bit of a wild. If DeVito starts every game, they will not win.
But if Bo Nix is your third, I think it creates and I'm feeling this more and more. I text two people this weekend because Jordan Palmer told me Friday on the Herd, he said, Bo Nix is your third. And I text two people over the weekend, and they were both like, just don't go to the Auburn tape. This kid's an athlete. He's married. He's accurate. He's decisive. Some of it's Oregon scheming. But I think now, if I think the Giants have the 5th or 6th pick, I'll tell you, that Giants-Patriot game, don't be shocked if the Patriots start Bailey Zappi.
Well, to me, the Giants feel like Drake Maye, don't they? That organization, that feel. Caleb, some of the previous stuff, I could see John Mara getting a little too high and mighty on it, but I would say that losing out makes a lot of sense for them. Losing out makes a lot of sense for the Pats too. I think these quarterbacks going 3, I do think that the discussion for the top quarterback, listen, Caleb's really, really talented, is definitely in play depending on who you talk to. He is not 32 for 32 number one. This is not Trevor Lawrence or Andrew Luck. Right. I don't know every GM in the league or every scouting director, but you get a lot. You just talk to 5 different people. You get different opinions. So, and the Bo Nix is another good example, right? Kind of a late bloomer. That's what happens. This is a stock, right? As you play games, you can increase your stock. Jaden Daniels, I'm sitting there on my couch watching this Florida game going, holy shit, this guy's running around like he's Michael Vick, throwing dimes down the field. You said the knock on him is frail. A guy that weighs 175 pounds, that's 5'9", just got drafted number 1 overall. So you're telling me Jaden Daniels at LSU and the SEC, same thing as Bryce, can't go in the top 10? I mean, come on.
Well, and this is something to think about, is that here's the one thing I'll say about, and I think Caleb's really unique talent. But Oregon State last year, he sort of pouted on the sidelines, the fingernail stuff, crying after the game. And he is now a little bit of his hero ball is the O-line has
they're terrible.
Huge disappointment for USC. They thought they had 4 NFL guys. It's not their defense bad. It's been a problem. Somebody gets through on every snap. Somebody misses a block on every snap.
There was yellow in the backfield every play last night. Every play.
Yeah. And Oregon's been recruiting 5-star guy. Oregon is the one program over the last 10 years with Cristobal and Lanning. They'll go to LA and they'll steal the best player in the state. They'll take it right from USC. So Oregon's got better players. They got better players than Washington, Utah, USC, UCLA. Oregon's got the best players in the conference. They can match up with everybody, including Michigan, in my opinion. Wouldn't beat it, but could match up. But I when I look at Caleb, I think the knock on him, because I've texted people and asked him, they're like, hey, he's a highly emotional player. So is Mahomes. And Mahomes is saved because of Andy Reid. When he goes off the fairway, Andy brings him back. And what somebody texted me in the league is, if he gets the right coach, he'll be fine. Got a Sean Payton. He goes to Chicago, gets a rookie coach. Because they have Carolina's pick. You're like, okay, you trust Chicago? You trust the rookie coach? So the take on Caleb is, if he gets a coach that a respected guy that could bark a little, it'll be fine. He's just too damn talented. I mean, he's a power thrower at 6.5 feet tall. He's a power thrower. But he does go, I mean, what would Mahomes be like with Brandon Staley, who can't get the defense right? Now, he'd be productive, but Herbert's pretty easy to coach, John. He's almost mechanical. Literally, he is just, every throw looks the exact same. Mahomes goes off the rails. Every year he did it against Denver. I'm going to just make stuff up and play flag football. Andy, next half he plays against Miami, reels him right back in. So I think Caleb is more coach dependent than I thought. That he could go sideways with the wrong guy in a Chicago.
I think anytime that your team kind of gets unraveled in college, people start asking questions. And I do think it's a healthy thing sometimes to really dive in to a prospect. I've said this the whole time. He's not a flawless prospect. This isn't LeBron James coming out of high school or Bryce Harper in the draft or what Andrew Luck was. He's under 6 feet tall. So there would just be questions, even if it had gone perfectly and USC was undefeated. Obviously, their program's in shambles. Can I give you a take?
Yeah.
I don't think Lincoln Riley really works in LA. I think they may. I have no problem. I'm not trying to act like they shouldn't have done it. They should have hired him. It was a no-brainer. You had to buy his house, $120 million, 100%, given where they were. But USC, let's face it, when they had Pete Carroll, a lot of juice. Like, it's an energy place, right? It's bright lights. It's like Vegas. It's just, you need to entertain. And Lincoln, it's more Texas, more Oklahoma, Texas A&M, job opening. I actually think he fits more that culture. It's where he's from. Both pressure cookers, which now he's at Oklahoma, but I would say A&M and USC are a little probably more rabid, a little crazier, obviously more money. I think that job makes more sense than him at USC. Now, I don't have a great replacement. Lane Kiffin, actually, more bright lights guy, is open to whatever, can just kind of handle some shit, is not afraid to talk. I don't know. There's something missing with Lincoln in that market. I mean, he's in your backyard. He is a good coach. I'm not just trying to act like he's the village idiot now because he's had a rough year. But I don't really think it's working. And I don't see a quick fix. And if they wouldn't have had Caleb, who is just an all-time great college player, we'll see how great his NFL career is. I think they're like a 4-win team. I mean, they are terrible, Colin. The last night would have been, they wouldn't have moved the ball. I mean, they would have had no shot. I don't think he works. And I think A&M, and who knows, maybe they don't have money because they're paying Jimbo $75 million. They have to hire the Duke guy for cheap or whatever just to get the train back on the tracks. I just think he makes more sense. I've always had a theory, geographically in college, Urban's an outlier. He went to the South and worked. For the most part, our buddy McElwain went to Florida, was having some success. They ran him out of town. Think of the guys in the South. Kirby. Nick grew up in West Virginia. Like, your regions matter. Think about the Northeast. The guy, Ryan Day, feels like an Ohio State Northeast guy. Jim Harbaugh went to Michigan. The West, think of the guys. Pete Carroll, West Coast guy. Chris Peterson, West Coast guy. Bellotti, Tedford. I think regions matter. And I think I look at Lincoln Riley, I just feel he's out of place. I just feel he's out of place.
No, it's interesting. He got very prickly with the media, and it was like, dude, this is not Norman. There's a lot of stuff to do. If you look at the history of Los Angeles, think about the managers or coaches that were successful. Tommy Lasorda, very successful. Phil, Pat Riley, Pete Carroll, Sean McVay. These are big personalities.
Yeah.
They steal some of the glamour from their team. Don't hog it, but they are, I mean, Pete's like, media, get in here. Snoop Dogg. LA is a big city. Riley, the McVay, Pete Carroll, they feel like they're big city guys. They can handle it. New York, I watched when I lived out in Connecticut, New York engulfs people. Joe Judge was engulfed. Joe Torre's kind of a good looking, made his money. Parcells, little bit of an attitude. Tom Coughlin, smart, going to push back. New York, there's a toughness in New York. I mean, Joe Torre, it wasn't great day one, right? He was doing angel games. I think he had a losing record, if I recall, when he took over. So he'd been through the wars of Major League Baseball. Joe Torre was a grown ass man. Like, nobody was going to push Joe around. And I think in New York, there's a toughness, and you have to have a thick skin, and you have to push back, because Boston falls in love with everybody when they arrive. And even if you're Ted Williams, they hate you when you leave. New York tests you. And if you can pass the test, they love you for life. So they're the opposite of Boston. Boston sort of sucks up to you. You came and love us, we love you. Then they hate everybody. New York, once you win the crowd, Parcells is minted for life. Los Angeles is funny. And I'm no expert on Los Angeles, lived here 8 years. You know, we both know Los Angeles pretty well. But the guys that work here sort of embrace Los Angeles. Don't close your practices. I remember talking to Urban Meyer one time privately about the USC job, and I said, this is not Gainesville. Can't close your practices. Like, we'll just do other shit. We won't go to your practice. I like Chip Kelly, but he's apathetic. He doesn't like recruiting. And so UCLA is invisible. Like, he doesn't play it up. He's not.
Well, he hates it. I mean, he won't do it. He refuses, you know. Part of it is you got to do it.
And I think sometimes with Lincoln, it's this sort of, hey, I want to control stuff. He did a lot of this year. Hey, we're close. It's not that bad. Lincoln, this is a sophisticated market. When people here bail on you, I mean, outside of the Dodgers and Lakers, people bail on teams here. They bail on you fast. He's trying to sell us something like it's Oklahoma, like it's the only thing we have. Dude, Alex Grinch over his head. I was watching the Lions-Chargers today. I'm like, did Alex Grinch get hired? Like, what are we doing here? It doesn't work. So I do think I like Lincoln, but don't try to sell LA on this sort of, hey, we're close. No, this looks like Clay Helton. That's what it looks like.
Well, think about the 50-year-old guy goes, Lincoln, I watched Pete Carroll's team. They had 10 out of their 11 starters were always top 3-round draft picks. I know what tackling looks like. Where at Oklahoma, they were so glad to have a dynamic offense, right? He revolutionized them. They needed him. It's like, hey, Lincoln, we've won national titles here. We've produced first-round offensive players many times. You're not going to be the first guy to send a guy in from this program to get drafted number 1 overall. We've had some quarterbacks along the way. Just walk through Heritage Hall. And I think he really struggled at understanding. It's like LeBron. Like, we're comparing you to Kobe, not some other person. This is hard. It's difficult. Play for the 49ers like Joe Montana, Steve Young. That's the bar here. And I just think there is where you grow up, dictates your personality. And listen, I got along in the East Coast because I can be edgy and sometimes my personality relates to the Philly, New York guy. But at my core, I can also have the California chill. Like, that's what I grew up around for 18 years, being in Sacramento, California. Lincoln grew up, I don't know the exact city, but somewhere in Texas. Then he went to Lubbock. It's ingrained in, and then he spent all that time at Oklahoma. I understand they gave him so much money. It was an incredible opportunity. I just don't like, okay, Caleb Lee, what are they going to do? Like, are they just going to be way better next year? I don't see it.
Here's the other thing in his offense, which isn't sort of there are elements of Mike Leach's offense, but it's not
for sure
air raid.
Yeah.
That top defensive coordinators, they don't want to work for a coach like that because, I mean, look at the history of defensive coordinators of something that looks like the air raid. Their career goes into the can. So I don't think, I mean, there's that guy that's at Oklahoma State, Derek Mason's a good coordinator, and San Diego State has a good one. But when you start spreading the ball out a lot, these defensive coordinators, they want to be head coaches. They don't want an offensive coach. They want physicality. And, that's why, by the way, Harbaugh that's why Urban, that's why Nick Saban, he gets great coordinator. Lose him, get another, because that style, that physicality for a defensive coordinator, it feels like the NFL. Like Lincoln's offense, that's not the NFL. That's college. And I think it's going to be and plus USC, LA is expensive. What do you got to pay a guy here? $2.5 million? They're not going to pay that for a DC.
No, because they make 1.82 in the SEC, which is dramatically cheaper, less taxes to live. So I'm with you. And the other thing is, listen, you and I, we both make fun of the Big Ten. Sometimes their speed, beside like Ohio State and Michigan, but that is a physical conference. And if Lincoln has a quarterback that's not a top 2 round and maybe a 4th rounder one year, if that's your team, the physicality, you're going to run into some losses on the road if you don't have the ethos of being a tough and physical team. And the way you practice, clearly, we've seen at Oklahoma, now at USC, it's not even debatable. You're just not going to be a tough team. So the only way to win is to just out-recruit everybody, and he's going to recruit itself, but Dan Lanning's recruiting his ass off. We know Ohio State recruits his ass off. We'll see what, Harbaugh. I mean, do you think Harbaugh's going to leave now with all this going on? He's kind of a wild card.
The NFL's tough, man. Chicago, everybody says, oh, Chicago. They have the oldest and one of the poorest owners. That doesn't
They're going to pay him $15 million? I don't know.
And then you start looking around at all if Brandon Staley left, then it's really, really attractive, right?
Yeah.
But the last great job was Matt LaFleur getting Aaron Rodgers, kind of late prime, but prime. McCarthy getting Dak, Zeke, and that O-line. That's a hell of a job. The Chargers with 3 pass rushers, left tackle, the center, that's a pretty good job. But let me tell you something. There's going to be a lot of guys want that job in the Spanos family. Never spent that kind of money. Never on a coach.
But Dean, would he be willing, because they went through it a little bit with A.J. Smith and Marty, and Harbaugh's way crazier than that version of Marty. But Marty was a big personality, wasn't just into super ideas from everybody, starting with the owner. And Harbaugh definitely isn't just coming into a think tank on a weekly basis. Oh, Dean and your sons, you feed me with some information. So it's more than just paying him. It's more just, do you want to deal with him? And you've been talking about this at Michigan. He guarantees you to win. He's 4 for 4. but there is more that comes with it.
Yeah.
And let's face it, these owners are so rich now. It's like, I could win with Harbaugh, but I'd rather try to find someone else for a little cheaper and that will listen.
I don't think that the Suns are vital in the front office. I do not think the Spanoses would hire Harbaugh. I think they'd give it to Kellen Moore on a cheap deal.
I agree.
And he could succeed. I think he's bright. I think they're a very good red zone team now. They weren't a good red zone team last year. They are a good red zone team. They were a bad second half offense last year. They're a good second half offense. So Kellen Moore's clearly working. And by the way, that was with Mike Williams. They don't have Mike Williams. So, I mean, Mike's a big downfield target. That's why they drafted Quentin Johnston. Mike was getting older, getting beat up. So it's all very fun. Okay, John Middlekauff, 3 and Out. We're going to do an hour now on Sundays, closer to it. Because we get great feedback. We see the numbers. And, buddy, this was just a lot of fun. I love this, man.
Well, we watched football weekend, Colin. We might as well talk about it, right?
All right, bud.
See ya.